Welcome to Women Who Transcend, a safe space where we reflect on, reimagine, and redefine what it means to be a modern woman.
At Women Who Transcend, we cover topics such as abundant living, femininity, wellness, and financial independence to help women live their best lives. Hey, sis.
Hey, sis.
Are you ready to transcend?
I'm ready. Let's get to it.
Wanted to start off this conversation and talked about what has created envy in today's world. And, I studied psychology, so I love just understanding the human brain and how it works and how it interacts. And one of the key things that I've read and studied about envy is that there has been an increase of this in today's world due to social media. Ashley, are you surprised by this? That social media has really increased?
Social media has just made our world so small. It's been so impactful in many ways. It's connected humans all across the world, but it's also made, things just seem right next door to us. Like, for example, I feel like Kim Kardashian's life is right next to mine, and that's not a reality. To be able to compare and contrast, we just have so much more information and exposure, and it's so easy to kind of allow that to allow us to get away from ourselves a little bit. So that does not surprise me at all, Chica.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel that if you think about it, most people have access to at least 2 to 3 social media platforms, right? And so, of course, there's Twitter and Instagram, and now there's Clubhouse and Facebook and a whole bunch of other social media platforms. And so we're actually inundated with so many images and videos and audios of other people's lives. And this is so different from even 20, 30 years ago. And so that is the reason why we've seen an increase in envy among people, especially because there's just this notion of, I love to call it relationship goals, that has been trending over the past few years. And I've come to find out no one has relationship goals. But nonetheless, there's still a lot of people who struggle with envy because of that. So there has been a huge increase with social media. And I feel that one of the ways that we can really start to protect our peace is to curate our social media experience. So me personally, I'm not constantly scrolling on Instagram. I pick certain periods where I'm on Instagram. And honestly, most of the time, if I get on Instagram or Facebook, it's either to just quickly see, my friends and see what's going on with them, just kind of like, okay, they're good, they're okay. Or it's really just to post something. So I keep it very minimal, at least for Instagram. I've tried Twitter. I actually have a big presence on Twitter, but I'm kind of like in and out. I have moments where I'm hot on Twitter, and then there's moments I disappear. So it really just depends.
Girl, I don't know how you do Twitter.
Girl, it's toxic, as you know. It's super toxic. It's super toxic. I've had some interesting Twitter connections. I'll just say that. So for me, I know the past few weeks I've actually really fallen back on Twitter because of that. But Ash, I'm curious about you of how you curate your social media experience just so that you're not inundated with all these different images and videos and different content.
Yes, and so I've always had a pretty limited social media exposure. I have Instagram, I have Clubhouse. Clubhouse is actually now one of my favorite platforms. We can't see anybody except for our little pictures or whatever, and I think it's a lot more about the content and what you have to share as opposed to what you look like or anything like that. One thing, this is not necessarily social media, but I can share this perspective. I actually stopped watching television back in 2009. That was the last time that I really owned and actively watched television. And that also means that I also don't watch Netflix. So I don't even stream things on my computer. So you can consider me like your modern day cave woman. I have don't ask me about Game of Thrones. I have no idea. I don't know anything that's going on from a pop culture perspective on television. But what I noticed is that my life dramatically changed once I stopped consuming so much television. I noticed that my spending habits changed dramatically. My comparison, my likelihood of comparing myself to others changed. I felt like my self-esteem increased, even though I didn't really feel like I had low self-esteem at the time. And I had so much more time to invest in things that I actually really valued. And this is actually not me making a judgment call on television. I think for a lot of people, television is actually a really beneficial tool, either to learn or engage or to wind down. And so this is just my life experience, but I've loved not having that. And I might actually get a television soon so that I can watch sports. I'm a big sports enthusiast, but I think that that's about it. So yeah, that's kind of like my experience of like detoxing a little bit from inundating or just digesting a lot of information that I might not have a lot of control over. And then I really heavily monitor my social media accounts and like who I follow and make sure that they're kind of aligned with the messaging that I need at the moment, and also kind of like the brands and people that I value their opinion and insights. So that's what it looks like for me.
Thank you, Ashley. And so I feel that for us to really broach this conversation, right, it requires both of us to be vulnerable. And so the first thing I want to talk about is, have you experienced envy among any of your friends? Have you, what has that felt like and looked like?
Yeah. So why don't I just take a moment, because the short answer to your question is yes, I have definitely experienced envy in my lifetime, and I look at envy as an emotion. Meaning that it is something that I might experience. It's not necessarily something that I have to be rooted in for an extended period of time, but it's something kind of like a trigger, right? And the way that I look at envy is envy can go one of two ways. It can be an amplifying tool, meaning that it can kind of serve for motivation and identifying things or things that you want to achieve in your life, or assets that you want to acquire, or whatever that might be. Envy or something that sparks you or triggers you can move you down a positive path, but it's also very much a slippery slope, right? And you can go and tumble down into a negative kind of envy utilization. And so I think that the times in which I actually might have been envious might have been times where I felt, if I were to reflect back, maybe I didn't have the high confidence level in that area of life. And that envy was kind of like a mirror to me to show me where I wanted to improve and what was top of mind for me. It had very little to do with the actual person that I was facing, and more so about how I was feeling about myself. Nowadays, I would say I experience a lot less, if not, or I would say just a lot less envy, because I realize that we're all in different stages of our lives. Different things had to have transpired for us to have the experience that we're having on a day-to-day basis. And nobody else's life looks like mine, and vice versa, right? And so once I got really crystal clear on what was important to me, what was top of mind, what I really valued, I found that a lot of the feelings of envy and the emotion around envy really started to dissipate. But if I were to say, like, I would not sit here and be like, no, I've never been envious of somebody else. That would be kind of ridiculous. I think everybody in this room, we have almost 150 people here, have probably felt the tinge of envy some way, shape, or form in their lives. So yeah. What about you, Chica? Have you experienced it, or have you been on the other side, meaning like you felt that somebody was envious of you and you didn't really know how to manage that?
Yeah, so I would say definitely both. Uh, if I just reflect on who I am as a person, I know I don't have an envious spirit, and we're going to talk about this later, because I actually find a lot of joy seeing my friends happy. Like, like recently there was a friend, and she's now in love. And I was just so happy seeing that for her, because I know that's something that she's been, looking for. And that really just brings me a lot of joy. Or if a friend has a baby or gets married or engaged or buys a house or bosses up and, tells me like, oh, I hit a 7-figure year. Like that actually brings me so much joy. So it's hard for me to really feel envy. What I will say though, is that when I first moved back to Lagos. So I moved back to Lagos 6 years ago. And let me tell y'all, it's different out here. I've never seen so many Chanel bags, Dior, all types, all the designers, they're there in Nigeria. And it's really in your face. And so I do remember, I'm coming from the US and I come here and I'm like, whoa. So is this what I need to do to fit in? Is this how I need to, connect with women? If I don't have this type of designer all the time, I'm not going to be able to make friends here. And so I did start to feel envious from a perspective of like, how did they get that? Or how are they, affording all these different things so easily? And it didn't last that long. I definitely had to snap out of it, because I started saying, but Chica, at your core, even with all the money in the world, that wouldn't be you. So why are you looking at them or trying to understand what they're doing? You need to focus on yourself. And so I definitely snapped myself back together. And I definitely don't even, pay attention to those things really anymore. And there's nothing wrong with designer, because I have designer stuff. But I do feel that it's quite heavy here in Lagos, and Ashley's in Lagos as well. And so there was that period where I first moved back and I had to adjust to just how I viewed people and just how they acquired things. So that was definitely, a period for me that I've experienced. Now, on the other side, I definitely have experienced envy from friends. And I feel I've never had like any blowout situation, but it's definitely been subtle. So they may say like certain things that are passive aggressive and you're like, oh, that's interesting. But for the most part, I realized that, everyone has moments of envy. So I for the most part, I try to give people grace. Now, I did have to cut off a friend who was, I realized in hindsight, she had an envious spirit. And at the time, as one of the statements she said to me was like, well, you attract so many men because you're bald. And I was like, what? And I just thought that was like crazy that she would say such a statement. But at the time, I didn't think anything of it until much later, and I reflected on it. And I was like, wow, like if I think about it, she's kind of made these little statements before, and that's, to me, is an envious spirit, right? And that's a whole different thing that we need to be careful of. So definitely experience both sides. And I'm really excited for us to even talk about just even how to identify it as well. Those with an envious spirit.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you, Chica, so like, how do you define that? What is an envious spirit versus a moment and a wave of emotion of envy? Curious, like what you look for in whether that's friendships or even, associates kind of relationships with people.
Yeah, and I like how you use associates, because I feel that there's clear boundaries with friends and associates. And it definitely, because being in Lagos, there are a lot of people who they may not be your friends, but you know of them or you see them enough. So there's definitely that element as well. So I feel that an envious moment is typically a one-off thing or every now and then a blue moon thing. So it's not something that is constantly being it's not a state of being for that person. So a quick example, and I feel this is probably the one that most people experience the most, is either when they get engaged or they have a child or they're pregnant. So of course, maybe you're the friend who is single or you're the friend that is not engaged yet. And, so if your friend comes to you and says they're engaged, and you don't really maybe welcome them with the best arms. And it could just be that moment, right? And then of course you snap out of that and you go back to the flow of the friendship, right? I know I've experienced this, but then I feel an envious spirit is that it's someone who's constantly in a state of envy, right? And so literally every time you let them know of good news or something that's positive that's happening in your life, or a major life milestone that you just completed, or you're moving past through, and if they always give you like a backhanded comment or something that's passive aggressive, or they're always letting you know all the negative points about it, then that's definitely an envious spirit. And I there's two people I can think of that were constantly like that, versus like one or two friends that maybe they just had an envious moment. So that's kind of how I distinguish the two. I'm curious to you, Ashley, like how you
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah, no, that definitely resonates. It's almost like, sometimes it gets masked as being a Debbie Downer or a pessimist, but really sometimes it's just like not finding an opportunity to uphold like your friend, like that, or just like be excited, or they always want to find a way to deflate what might be a really happy moment for you, right? One thing that I often look for, and I don't know if this is immediately, or I don't know if this is directly drawn to envy, but it is something that I've started to recognize, is that sometimes friendships, somebody actually said this in the morning session, sometimes friendships are built off of different like trauma bonds, or what they call like common frenemies. And so our relationship is built off of the fact that we dislike the same people. And sometimes when I see people that try to connect with me in that way, I get extremely worried, because I'm like, oof, you might be just like breeding like a very negative environment. And if you're always bringing up something negative about somebody else, the likelihood of you doing the same for me, and like maybe casting doubt in other people's eyes about me, is very, very high. So I really tried to avoid that kind of personality trait. I wouldn't say that it's a 100% direct correlation to envy, but I've sometimes found that the people that do this are often the ones that typically have like an envious spirit, usually. So that's what I look for.
And then I feel that it's also important that we lay out, we're having all these conversations around the envious spirit and also an envious moment, and realize that in general, however you meet envy, right? Realize it's not personal. A lot of times, envy is drawn from insecurities, limiting beliefs, and I want Ashley to expand on this, lack of self-confidence, and just a syndrome of comparison. So, sometimes people have this constant comparison syndrome they go into. So that's the reason why places like Instagram has really increased envy, because you're looking on Instagram and you're looking at what other people are doing and you're constantly comparing yourself. And so this is actually something that I really learned through therapy, because I remember talking to my therapist about certain friends I felt were envious. And, she reminded me that, well, look, these are some of the things they may be going through. Have you ever considered that they're trying to work through a specific challenge in their life right now, and that's the reason why they're looking at you, and they just can't fathom how can they get to where you are, right? And again, don't take it personal. Don't take it as it's something that you did wrong. So I feel that that's really important to remember. And if you can remember that, I feel that we can also give our friends a lot more grace in that moment. So, of course, be mindful. If you're constantly seeing this all the time, that's a whole different scenario. But if it's a one-off situation, just realize that, give your friend grace, and understand that maybe there's some type of limiting belief that they have. I know recently, I literally just had this conversation with a friend yesterday about dating and relationships. And I told her, some of the stuff you're telling me sounds like a limiting belief. And if you feel that you can, that this is the type of guy you want, then you should, I want you to feel and reflect on that you can get that person, right? So that's something I'm trying to keep more in mind, and give my friends a lot more grace if I notice an envious moment.
No, that's great, Chica. Yeah, sometimes, we just never know what we know, like probably 10% of what's going on in somebody's life, even if they're transparent and sharing a lot. Maybe in a good scenario, we know like maybe 30 or 40%, right? But like, I think extending grace and realizing that most of the time it can be an envious moment as opposed to an envious like character trait. I think that kind of helps us extend grace and just smooth things over and continue to uphold the friendship.
Amazing, Ashley. So can you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. And so can you talk about limiting beliefs and how we could potentially move past them?
Yeah, so when I think of limiting beliefs, I'm really thinking of this connection between self-confidence. And when I think of self-confidence, just breaking that down a little bit, this is really the internal voice that we have and about our abilities, about what we can bring into the world, about our unique gifts. And when I see someone that is deeply rooted in self-confidence, usually they are very clear about their strengths and weaknesses, but also really excited about the things that they can bring to the table and what makes them unique. And when I think about self-limiting beliefs, it's more so imposing what could be a true or false expectation about a scenario or a future opportunity that you just don't feel that you can achieve, a future state that you don't feel that you can achieve. And tying that into envy in relationships, sometimes it's that we are seeing somebody achieving what it is that we want to create in our lives, or acquiring things that we are excited about acquiring, but we might not yet be there. And we might see that there's a barrier between what we want and where we want to be. And so kind of, you can do a few things. It depends on your personality, but like using envy as a motivational tool to identify the unique gifts that you have within yourselves that you can then use to combat your self-limiting beliefs, I think is really, really helpful. But I'm curious, like, I think we all have our own unique self-limiting beliefs. I don't know, Chica, if you're interested in sharing maybe one of yours, and I can do the same, just in the interest of transparency.
Yes,
but I'm curious.
we really talk about being vulnerable, and I set the stage saying we're going to be vulnerable today. So, interestingly, as much as I talk about relationships, one of my limiting beliefs before, I've definitely moved past this. For probably been a few years since I moved past this, but it was the limiting belief around finding a partner that will truly cherish me. So there's a difference between I feel love and cherish. So you can be with someone that loves you, but I remember a few years ago, I said, I really want to be with someone who cherishes me, who adores me. I remember I even wrote this in my list. You know how they always talk about write the list. And in that, I really just focused on characteristics. And I wrote down, I want someone who cherishes me, who adores me. And the reason why I knew this was a limiting belief was because for years, I kept ending up with people who weren't doing that. And I stayed because I kept thinking, well, maybe the type of love that I'm going to have is going to be like this. Maybe it's not going to be this rainbow and sunshines and, constant laughter. Maybe it's a different type of love. Maybe I'm thinking too much or my standards are too high. But I kept writing it down as something I wanted, but I kept entering relationships that were the opposite, right? And so I know that was a limiting belief I really had to work on. And interestingly, what actually changed the game for me was the last relationship I was in before the one I'm in now. And I knew the person loved me. His actions showed me that, but I didn't feel cherished. I just didn't. I didn't feel cherished. I didn't feel fully adored, right? I just felt that, and sometimes he even said, what's the word he used to use? Like, he used to see marriage as a more of like, well, you need to be married because of all these different things. And it sometimes it didn't feel like he wanted to, right? And so I left that and I told myself, I can't do that again. Like, I need to be in a relationship where I feel joy and adored and cherished. And now I'm in one, right? But I definitely had to do a lot of work and reflection and really just getting aligned with my intuition. That's really what has keeps guiding me to come out of those relationships that I didn't feel cherished. But that was definitely a limiting belief I had for years. I'm thankful that I've removed myself from that now.
Oh, thank you for sharing, Chica. Yeah, that's definitely a powerful one. And if I think about my self-limiting beliefs, one that is always reoccurring is just like me potentially not achieving my potential and like falling short in some way. And so I've had a not a high profile career, that might be exaggerating a little bit, but like I feel like I've been kind of like really focused on career and achievement, and I feel like I'm always going and like reaching that next rung, but then there's this side of me that's like, oh my gosh, when do I get to rest? But in resting, do I sacrifice actually achieving my potential? So this is just like this balance that I have that I'm always kind of going back and forth between. So that's the one on my side. Yeah. I'm going to pass it over to you, Chica. I know we've been talking for a little bit. Do you want to reset the room quickly?
Yes, and then let's bring up some people to connect with our community. I already see hands raised. And so welcome to Divine Feminine Awakening. This is a clubhouse that was co-founded by Ashley and myself, and we help women to reflect on, reimagine, and redefine their lives rooted in femininity. So in today's conversation, we're talking about managing envy in friendships. And I really have been enjoying this conversation. On Tuesday, when we spoke about this, we had a queue. We couldn't even keep up. So we realized that a lot of women want to talk about their friendships. And I think especially with the pandemic, a lot of us have been reflecting on our friendships. So the one thing that I want to share, because in each and every room we host, we always want to give away a resource because we feel it's important to pour into the community, is we created a 7-day challenge. And this challenge is for anyone that is two things. Number one, you are ready to do that inner work, that reflection, and you want to kickstart that. Number two, you are interested in feminine energy. You want to live a life in flow, or soft life, as I like to say now. And you're ready to rest just a little bit, as Ashley was saying, like, when can I rest? And so we created this 7-day guide for you to really get started on that. So follow us on Instagram. It's attached to our profiles. And just send us a DM saying 7 days, and we will send that guide over to you. So again, just follow us on Instagram. Send a DM saying 7 days, and we will send over that guide. We just love the testimonials, and a lot of women have felt super transformational throughout this 7 days. So if you're ready for that experience as well, just follow us on Instagram, and we'll send over the guide.